Good afternoon and welcome to Iowa City Foreign Relations Council's program featuring guest speakers Yasmina Sahir and Asel Nasr. Thanks to them both and to everyone who has joined us in person and online today. I am Lexi Pasno, an ICFRC intern and your host for today's program. ICFRC wants to acknowledge and thank its annual donors, members, sponsors, and partners for their support. This list includes the Iowa Arts Council through the Iowa Department of Cultural Affairs, Humanities Iowa and the National Endowment for the Humanities, the University of Iowa's International Programs, Honors Program, and the Public Policy Center, the Stanley UI Foundation Support Organization, Midwest One Bank, Taxes Plus, and City Channel 4 for providing online access to ICFRC's programs along with the UI Library Archives. ICFRC has adopted the Native American Land Acknowledgement prepared for the City of Iowa City's Ad Hoc Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Human Rights Commission. ICFRC recognizes that our home community of Iowa City now occupies the homelands of Native American nations to whom we owe our commitment and dedication. The full text of ICFRC's acknowledgement is on its website at icfrc.org. Please join me in welcoming our speakers who will talk about advocating for SWANA community members in Iowa City.
Hi, so I just want to make sure everyone can hear me, right? We're good? So before we start, I just wanted to give a quick content warning for our presentation tonight. We're going to be talking about some themes that include violence, colonization, harassment, discrimination, and so if anybody at any point needs to take a break from this space, we understand that, and you're welcome to step out of the room and come back when you feel ready to do so. And in line with that, we understand that the conversations we are launching may be uncomfortable as they include alternative narratives to what is usually include alternative narratives that is usually what we talk about in American media and American academia. And so we all grow in these uncomfortable spaces, and we hope that any questions can be answered at the end of the presentation, and we will leave a Q&A about 15-20 minutes for any of those questions. So my name is Yasmina Sahir. I'm a Moroccan-American student here at University of Iowa. I study Criminology and Social Justice. I'm a fifth year, hoping to move on in my career in Middle East North African Studies, and I do a lot of community activism here in town. And I'm going to let you...
Hi, everyone. My name is Asel Nasr, and I am a Libyan student here at the University of Iowa. I'm studying global health, and I'm also pursuing a master's in public health currently.
And as Lexi let everyone know, we are here to talk about Middle East North African advocacy at University of Iowa. And we're going to start with just a few slides of photos here, which Asel will give us more of a background on.
Yeah, so the photos on these slides depict the Western media's portrayal of what the MENA region is like. This is what most people are used to seeing, which is a war-torn, violent, and unsafe part of the world. We are grateful for community advocacy to help our politically displaced peers. We have to address the misconception about violence in the MENA region, war-torn areas, and the role that all U.S. taxpayers play in continuing violence in the MENA region. While many areas in the MENA region are experiencing active conflict, this does not mean that the entire country is in upheaval, nor that these wars are the fault of that country's citizens alone. International policies, shady arms deals, and oil deals, as well as promotion of nationalism and aristocratic regimes have led to what the world views as the MENA region today. While many people are fleeing the region due to political violence at the hands of the U.S. and the EU, regimes and rebellions in the region, some MENA immigrants in the U.S. are the same as any other immigrant group. They came here seeking opportunities. When we conflate MENA immigrants with refugees in war, we continue the idea that this region equates to violence and nothing more. So I have a couple words here, which I'll define as I go. If we only keep in mind that the Western ideas of the MENA regions, we do more harm than good. The only advocate for refugee and anti-war efforts for a group is equivalent to the promotion of stereotypes, the promotion of Western exceptionalism, which is the belief that Western countries are either distinctive or superior compared to other nations, promotion of white saviorism, which is the belief that white people are here to save, help, teach, and protect their non-white counterparts under the assumption that they know what's best for them. More often than not, this ends up doing more harm than good. And finally, the promotion of othering. So this term is the process often used to dehumanize minority individuals. It involves seeing people as fundamentally different from the dominant group based on race, national origin, language, or other elements of culture. This is the other reality of the MENA region. These are pictures that Yasmina and I took from our travels to Morocco, Turkey, and Libya. So if you want to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, and we just wanted to include these photos to show that just like in the US, there are violent areas in the MENA region, and there are also peaceful areas where people just live a normal life. They go to school, go to work, take care of their families, and enjoy. And so we, on this slide, my photos are here on the left side of the screen. And you can see a picture of a museum in Morocco, and then as well a landscape of a photo of the Mohammed VI Boulevard in downtown Marrakesh, and as well a photo of some food that my aunties made for me when I was there visiting this winter, some couscous and kefta that went along with it, for folks in the room who know about couscous, right? So good. And then Asel has her photos on the other side.
Yeah, so my photos are on the left side. So the top left photo is a photo of Roman ruins in Sabratha, Libya. And then the bottom photo is also in Libya, the one in the bottom left corner. And then that middle photo was taken in Istanbul, Turkey.
And so before we get into advocacy here at University of Iowa, we wanted to give folks in the room who might not know the background and the history of the MENA region, just a little bit of that, the geography, the political history, so that we can move our conversation into modern day issues. So as we can see here on this list, the Middle East and North Africa include countries Algeria, Bahrain, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, Oman, Palestine and the occupied territories, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Tunisia, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. Oftentimes, other countries surrounding what's on the presentation slide here are included, such as Afghanistan. Somalia is another country that's often included. This is a list of the most commonly talked about countries when we say MENA in academia. That does not mean that other countries aren't included or some of these countries aren't excluded at other times in those conversations. And this goes to show that this region isn't necessarily a concrete term. This region has been created just along with the national borders that separate these countries through colonization, through military violence, and through Western imperialism in the region. And so to talk about why these countries and their borders have changed brings into mind that this area is actually Southwest Asia and North Africa. And the term Middle East, where that comes from, is in the 20th century and the 19th century when the British trading companies were heading to India, which they labeled as the East. They realized that going around the entire continent of Africa was not only dangerous, but time-consuming, and time-consuming meant money. And so as they traveled on their way from mostly Britain and France, on their way to India, they would pass through the Strait of Gibraltar, which separates the top tip of Morocco and the bottom tip of Spain, and they would head through passageways that are now included in Egypt and Palestine on their way to India, again, the East. And so that region in between in the land that is there was come to known as the Middle East, and we have documents of that from the diaries and the writings of different scholars in Europe, as well as seamen at the time when we can note when that term first came about. And so now, today, to reflect on moving away from that history of imperialism, of stealing resources, the community preferred term has become SWANA, Southwestern Asian North African, and Arab. And we like to distinguish out that Arab identity from the rest of the group because not all peoples in this region are Arab, which is an often conflated idea, especially in the West. In a similar manner, not all Arabs are Muslim, not all Muslims are Arab. There are many indigenous groups that live in this region, including the Bedouins, the Copts, the Amazi, which in Western media are known as the Berbers. Another point that I like to bring up here is that term Berber comes from a European word meaning barbarian. And so even in the namings of these countries and these groups, we can see that Western imposition and the white supremacy and the white saviorism, that where people were told, you're too uncivilized, you're too savage. And so we have to come in, we name you, we create these borders, and we create something that isn't wanted, but in more of a Western idea of what societies and civilizations should be. And so just to reflect again, at this point in the presentation, we will switch to only referring to this community as SWANA instead of MENA to reflect that this is becoming the preferred community term. As we stated before, I just wanted to highlight more of like an accurate depiction of this region on a geographic map. Since I can't really come over to the screen from where we're at here from the podium, I just wanted to let folks know, as we talk about the SWANA region, we have 3 different areas we like to refer to, if you can see on the screen. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, and Yemen is part of what we refer to as the Gulf region. Above that, in Iraq and Syria and Jordan and Palestine and Lebanon, we have the Levant. And then in most of all of that North African region is often referred to as the Maghreb. Of course, Libya and Egypt are 2 countries that get thrown back and forth between being considered the Levant or the Maghreb based on political, political movements at the time, types of violence, what's going on in terms of Western influence. And so, again, those borders are constantly changing, and it's not from the SWANA perspective that these borders are changing. It's European imaginations of this region that affect where those borders lie. We also want to recognize that while this group has been clumped together due to similarities in linguistic backgrounds and some elements of culture, that these 3 regions are made of a variety of people, religions, languages, and experiences, kind of as we stated on that previous slide. And just one more background issue before we launch into some more University of Iowa-focused things. We wanted to discuss the terms First World, Second World, Third World, and the Global South. These terms, Third World and the Global South, are often used to describe African and Asian nations. And from being in American classrooms, I have come to learn that a lot of, especially American, European only folks who only have a background in those countries seem to understand these terms through economic connotations, through developmental connotations. And that's not really the truth of where they come from. In the time of the World Wars and the Cold War, First World were any countries who aligned themselves with the European Union and the United States. The Second World countries aligned themselves with what was then the Soviet Union. Third world countries were countries who either said, I don't want a piece of this, I'm not getting involved, or countries that were colonized, and then those peoples who were used as colonial soldiers to help European movements, such as the stealing of Amazi men to fight on the front lines in France and in Britain. Now, as through that colonization legacy, there is a developmental difference between these countries, but that is due to the stealing of resources. And I hope that this graphic doesn't come across flippant, but I love to use this picture of Queen Elizabeth that surfaced after her death as an example of where a lot of the wealth in European and Western nations come from. And so we can see that the jewels that she's wearing and the cloth are from countries like Barbados, Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, India, South Africa. And so these countries were wealthy at one point, but their resources have been stolen. And the resources that are still there are taken from them at a cost that is not proportional to what is given back to them when they're sold in the West. Likewise, I just wanted to say that we must recognize the impact of the late 20th century and the early 21st century on terms like first, second, and third world, because there's been a new category added, fourth world. This is used to describe countries that have terrorist connotations. many of the Southwest Asian and North African countries are deemed fourth world at this time and are said from the State Department perspectives of European countries and the US that they are not safe to be traveled to. At the university here, we have been told in conversation that certain grants and certain travel abroad experiences should not be granted to folks wanting to go to these countries because it is deemed unsafe for Americans to be there. And we ask why that is the case. And of course, we can look through at the history of the results of the Patriot Act and the Gulf Wars, which further villainized this region and connected Muslims, North Africans, and Southwest Asians to terrorism. I wanted to approach this subject, but I'm almost hesitant in a way because I'm wondering how an American audience will be able to reflect on the racial binary that is existing in this country, but also how we all play into this on a day-to-day basis. And so in the US, we have a basic understanding of racial structures as white folks and non-white folks. And for a long time, this history was white folks and black folks. And we can see this legacy through things like the three force laws, through blood quantum measures, through the institution of slavery, that makes it so if you're anything but white, you are less than. But of course, now that we can't fit everybody into these boxes that they make us check, every time you get a new job, every time you apply for a college, every time you fill out the census, what happens to people who don't fit into a box? And that's where Southwest Asian and North African folks are left at this point in time. Under current U.S. federal legislation, we are forced to place ourselves in the white American category. It explicitly states that this box, the white American, is for anybody from European, North African, and Middle Eastern background. However, a lot of SWANA community members don't feel that they are white. They don't feel that they are treated on an equivalent level to their white peers in the workplace, in schools, and in their personal lives. When Asel and I first met, we asked each other, what country are you from? We didn't say, what race are you? What other, that's how we view ourselves, I feel like, in the SWANA region, is the predominant, where are you from? What is that national tie? And so for us, it's kind of hard to think about assigning ourselves to just a racial descriptor, because that's what folks in the US think about you first. That is the first thing that they see. That's the first thing that you are judged on. And so to dispel some rumors that contribute to the black-white binary here in the US, we wanted to uplift that not all Africans are black, as two North Africans standing before you, but not all Black Americans are African either. And the rhetoric that Africa is a black continent came out of the institution of slavery here in the United States because it made people feel less guilty, less like they were participating in wrong and suffering, to think of a whole continent being less than the nation that they were stealing folks and taking them to. We also wanted to recognize that indigeneity goes beyond Native American and Pacific Islander groups. There are indigenous folks all around the world, and to be indigenous does not necessarily mean that you have to be indigenous to the land that you're standing on, which U.S. Census and U.S. demographic markers make you distinguish between. If you're not indigenous to this country, you can't say you're indigenous. And likewise, I wanted to uplift, though, that this isn't to say that racism doesn't exist in the SWANA community. It's very much alive and well, as in every society and social institution. And so this is not to say that we are addressing or approaching this issue in a colorblind manner. It's just to uplift that we can't all fit into these boxes that society and governments have created for us. And so part of our presentation here, as we'll get into later, is trying to find where do SWANA people fit in the United States.
So this is the example of the experiences of being microaggressed and racialized by all Americans, including other BIPOC individuals making terrorist jokes in our direction, stating they understand the ongoing violence and the wars brought to our ancestral lands by Western powers because of their historical experiences, and being overlooked when others advocate for marginalized groups. When you are neither white or BIPOC, according to the U.S. definitions, you are made to feel as though you don't belong. So this is a quote here, and I feel like it does a really good job summing up to show the impact that racial, ethnic, and religious miscategorization has on this community. So I'm just going to read it out loud, and you guys can read it with me. So while much of the recent emphasis has been on anti-Asian and anti-Black American motivated hate crimes, members of the SWANA community continue to face similar threats without the benefit of clear identification of race, ethnic, or religious motivation due to frequent misidentification.
We wanted to next highlight some ways in which SWANA Americans are treated similar to their BIPOC peers. Of recent example is COVID-19 health disparities. Currently in the United States, federal information on public health crises, on changes in government legislation are only required to be translated into English and Spanish. This leaves behind many SWANA immigrants especially who come to this country not fully understanding a professional, maybe governmental form of English. And likewise, this is further perpetuated by the fact that Arabic is a very complex language. As somebody who is trying to learn this myself, there is a written and reading version, and there is spoken versions. And so if you're somebody who is coming as an immigrant who hasn't been taught that written reading version of Arabic, no one is translating this information into spoken Arabic either, leaving folks, I have family members myself who live in Morocco still who are illiterate, and when they try to access media from the West, it is hard for them to get anything that is spoken and translated verbally into Arabic. Likewise, in during COVID-19, we saw that the SWANA community was greatly left behind in terms of vaccination and the payments that were, the term is failing me right now, but the payments, the stimulus checks, that's what it was. Seems like so long ago that those were happening. But yes, there were many immigrants from the SWANA region left behind during what were supposedly efforts to help all Americans. Another way that SWANA Americans are treated similar to their BIPOC peers is through police violence and disproportionate incarceration. We'll talk about some gaps in the research next. At this point, because we are not counted on census data, there is no federal funding spent on recognizing disparities for SWANA Americans in health, education, policing, and incarceration, nothing. And so we actually don't have an accurate number even of how many SWANA ethnics are living in the United States to date. But we can note that police are often sent and Border Patrol are often sent to monitor these populations, especially in a post-Patriot Act time that we're living in now. We know that Arab and SWANA men are often targeted and seen as abusers and are sent to prison at a higher rate than their white peers for cases of domestic violence and other such crimes. We want to also uplift that SWANA youth are being labeled as aggressive, abusive, and more mature than their white peers, especially young men, which is a similar experience that Black Americans face in this country as well. There is a lack of aid to countries experiencing humanitarian crises that are in the SWANA region. We can tell from our own Governor, Kim Reynolds. She has been opening her arms and welcoming to Ukrainian refugees fleeing violence right now happening in their country. But when it came to Afghani refugees trying to find safety from the Taliban, she said, no thanks, not for me. And we can see this happening over and over again in history, where SWANA folks are told, we don't want you here. The Muslim panic, right? But yet white European folks who are fleeing similar forms of violence are given aid or given support, and sometimes their countries are uplifted so they don't even have to flee in the first place. We also want to note the immigration limits and bans that have been placed, especially in the Trump administration that lasted from 2016 to 2020. Many SWANA countries had immigration bans placed on them under the, quote, Muslim ban. Again, that equation of SWANA folks with Muslims and Muslims with violence, which none of those are true.
So, like Yasmina mentioned, due to the lack of federal funding, we don't really have any updated or exhaustive statistics on the SWANA population. Health, education, social resources, and other forms of data are collected through the federal census in the United States. Because the SWANA community is included in the white American category on all demographic forms, SWANA Americans are often excluded from the statistical analysis and on socioeconomic status and discrimination issues impacting this community. And I think too, like just to relate back to the last slide, this also has many impacts on health disparities and accessing healthcare and just social determinants of health. So if you guys aren't familiar with that term, that just means housing, access to resources, access to healthcare, and things like that. So, yeah.
So what's progress is happening in Iowa City? And we can pretty much say not much. This next part, because we recognize that we're coming up on time, we'll move a little bit more quickly. But through these next slides, we're going to recount some of our experiences trying to advocate for our community here on campus and in the wider Iowa City. As of the 2022-2023 academic year, we have approached multiple campus offices asking for a designated cultural space on campus. They have denied that ask. We have asked for data collection and formal representation on campus, and sorry for that typo there. They have denied that ask. We have asked for protection from discrimination and harassment in the classroom and in the community, and we have been told there's nothing that can be done. This is an email to myself from the registrar's office at University of Iowa when I reached out asking why, when in other cases we uplift diversity and inclusion and we allow for different forms of representation and identity markings on demographic forms for other folks on campus, why isn't the same happening for SWANA students? Their response was that this is a Big Ten policy. So I asked questions. I called University of Michigan, University of Illinois, Ohio State, and University of Minnesota, who all collect data on SWANA students on their campuses. Obviously, it's not a Big Ten issue. This is an email from a student who we were told to work with for undergraduate student government purposes to create a diversity constituent position for a SWANA community member to take in the spot and represent us when issues are being passed through the Senate. We wanted to note that in this email, when we told him that we would like the MENA bill at that time, as it was labeled, to be changed to the SWANA bill, that he wanted to inform us that the SWANA acronym is also used by a large waste company management company, which might not be a super savory connection to create, but we will have plenty of time to consider and get input from others. This is not a term that Asel or I have invented. This is a community term that is used around the nation, but this is a good example of a microaggression in the form of white saviorism. He's stepping in to inform us that what we're doing is not okay, or is not going to give a good impression on other folks. And so these are the type of instances that we experience here on campus. I've had professors call on me in class, cold calls, asking me, tell me how women are treated in your country. I have had professors decide that the date of the end of Ramadan, Eid al-Fitr, is a good time to lecture on 9/11 and to talk about the plight of Islam. I have had professors tell me that I'm lucky that I made it here safely, when I myself am not an immigrant. My parents are, and I thank them every day for the work that they have put in to make us a good life here. But those are just a few of my experiences, again, that I've tried to report to the university, to which I've been told, you're white. You can't be discriminated against on race, ethnicity, or national origin. White people can't be hate crimed. White people can't be discriminated against. That's just not how it works. So what can you do to support? So one thing is educate yourself, and you all are here. And so events like this, you can show up and you can learn, and don't depend on your SWANA peers and community members to do that work for you. We are tired enough as is. Not only are we struggling to get representation and resources here in the United States, most of us have family back in our ancestral countries who are struggling without power, in some cases without electricity, working to make a living, in countries that are still trying to work through the lasting effects of colonization. For my own home country, it was not decolonized till 1956. Many of this, and we were early for the SWANA region. Other things you can do is tell UI and Iowa City that this matters to you. Reporting students and staff who make inappropriate comments, sending emails when they talk about making changes. Tell your representatives that this matter, and pay attention to current events. In this past few weeks here, I'm sure most of us have heard about the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria that are devastating thousands of people. I believe the last death toll that I saw was 33,000. 41,000. Thank you for that correction. I was just on a Zoom call today with Lebanese parliament members who have been without power and electricity. Sorry, that's the same thing. Electricity and lighting or in their house, like all of those different things. And they are struggling to get through reformative changes through their government that is harming people, harming the citizens, and stealing money that should be going back to the people. And so people are surviving a winter without heat in their houses, without light. Other things you can do are just vote. And we understand that this is a nonpartisan group, so we're not trying to politically sway anybody. We're not here talking about politics. We're here talking about human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights includes these articles, and I won't read them for you because it's a long list. But we know that there is a right to life, liberty, and security of person. We know that there is an article, number 12, that says no arbitrary attacks on privacy, family, home, or correspondence. We know that in Article 14, everyone has a right to seek asylum. And we note that in Article 21, there's equal access to public services. The U.S. has signed on to the UDHR, and at the time of its creation, many SWANA countries, because they were colonized, were not allowed to sit in on UN discussions. And so we have not had a voice, but we deserve the same rights as other folks in the world and other folks here in the United States.
So there are some wonderful contributions that have been made here at the University of Iowa by SWANA, SWANA community members, and this is a quote from an article titled "The Instrumentalization of Human Rights is the Most Serious Threat to Human Rights." This has recently been published by Professor Ahmed Swaya. I never know how to pronounce it.
We call him Professor Ahmed.
Yeah. So the quote reads as follows. Human rights are universal because human rights abuses are universal. In order to promote and appreciate the universality of human rights, one must consider and treat all governments, especially powerful ones, irrespective of their claims to being democratic, liberal, authoritarian, monarchical, Islamic, or whatever form of government they wish to portray themselves as. They all must be considered and treated as abusers or potential abusers of and perennial threat to human rights.
So we're going to leave you with this last slide. And just to say that to support SWANA community members is to be the same as anti-imperialist and against colonialism, to be pro-women's rights and pro-choice, to be anti-racist, to be anti-sexual violence, to be for healthcare equity, and to be anti-police brutality. We also, at the end, and we're going to head into a Q&A session here really quick, but we just wanted to say a quick thank you to our professor, Yasmin Ramadan, who worked on this research with me and who made this presentation possible tonight by signing on to be a faculty advisor for us as we've been advocating here on campus and doing our research. And without her, she asked us to not mention her, but without her, this would not be possible, so we don't feel right not mentioning her name. We also want to thank Professor Ahmed and other SWANA professors on campus who have been aiding us and helping us in this work, and for their constant support as we come to them with issues that the university chooses not to hear. They have always opened their ears and their offices to us as students. But yeah, we'll take any questions at this point.
Thank you both. So we now move to the question and answer portion of our program. For those here in the audience, please raise your hand if you have a question. For those watching via live stream who would like to submit a comment or question, please text them to 319-600-2588. Again, that's 319-600-2588. While we are waiting for questions to come in, ICFRC wants to thank its members and donors for their support. If you would like to join ICFRC or make a gift to support its programs, please go to icfrc.org. Thank you.
So even though the university doesn't have a cultural house for SWANA individuals on campus, do you guys have a group that's not housed in a house?
Yeah, we do have a what's called the Middle East North African Student Association, MANASA. There's also a group for Muslim students on campus, MSA. The reason why we were pursuing a cultural house, though, is because other groups on campus have access to that cultural space, and at this point, Manasa is forced to kind of bounce around from location to location, which can make it really hard to build a community here on campus. And so we reached out to the university just asking for a space that we could decorate similar to other cultural organizations have been able to do, that we could have consistent meetings or plan events. And again, at this point, they have informed us that there's actually no more money going into cultural houses on campus, last that I had heard, and so that a cultural house for Manasa at that point, or for SWANA students in general, would not be possible.
I'm wondering, in terms of advocating for the SWANA community on campus, you've noted that you've run into some resistance. You've faced real challenges. I wonder, looking forward and given these challenges, what are the next steps that you all see here at the University of Iowa advocating for this community?
I think continuing to face these challenges, because I don't think the resistance is ever going to stop. Me and Yasmina have been working on this for the past 2 years. Endless Zoom meetings, endless go talk to this person about this, go talk to this person about this, and like nothing really good coming out of it. But I don't know about you, Yasmina, but I'm not going to give up on this, because I always think about future students that are going to come to the University of Iowa, and I want them to have a place where they feel like they belong, where they feel like they're represented, and where they feel like their voices are being heard. So,
yeah, I agree with Asel that I don't think that I personally am going to give us up on this at any point. I know that there are other members of the SWANA community, just like any community, that aren't interested in the politics and the advocacy. And so we, Asel and I, have worked together to try to find as many students who want to be involved as we can. But again, without things that where we can build community, like cultural spaces, like formal understanding of how many students who are SWANA are on this campus, it's really hard to get momentum going. But I really like to reflect on, there's a quote that came out of Morocco during the Arab Spring, where a man was arrested, and he said to the press, "We have two options, and that's silence or prison." And I am grateful to be in a country where those are not my only two options, and I'm not going to choose silence. I'm going to keep speaking out because these issues are important. And so that's kind of the guiding philosophy that keeps me going, and that I really think that in terms of advocating from a non-SWANA perspective, really just spreading awareness, having informal conversations. I get coffee with my organizer friends all the time, and we talk about things impacting us and impacting the community. But like we said before, you can send emails when right now there is a current change going through the Biden administration to separate the Latin and the SWANA community out of the white American category. And we've seen this happen over and over again every census year since the 1990s. And so this would be, let me do a quick count, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020, or 2020. So this would be the 5th year that this has been proposed as a change, and every year it loses momentum. And so keeping notice of those changes that could be happening federal will definitely trickle down and change things here on a state level as we're at a state public university. And so, yeah, just I would say keep informed and keep talking, because that'll be a help enough. Yeah.
Are there any tangible ways that you Iowa students on campus can help organize, whether SWANA or to help SWANA students and faculty on campus, whether you're SWANA or not, any ways that we we can help on campus?
Okay. Yeah. I think that, so within the past school year, there have been several protests and like organizing efforts on campus to uplift issues happening in the SWANA region. And so there were protests here in support of the Iranian protests after Masa Amini's death in September of 2022. I know that there are current ongoing efforts to try to raise some money for victims of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. And so in terms of advocating like what you can do on campus, I think at this point, what I have understood is that people are really tired. Especially like SWANA folks are really, you know, it's draining to be microaggressed, to be racialized, to know that in a way, like we were saying before, you belong, but not really. And so I think from a non-SWANA perspective, I would say exactly what I said to Peter just a second ago, you know, just keep spreading awareness, keep talking, informing your friends, doing that research on your own, but also creating space for your Muslim and your SWANA peers, because just finding community is hard enough at University of Iowa. So from a peer-to-peer level, from as students, just letting us know that we're welcomed and that we belong is really impactful.
Would you be willing to give a talk to groups in the community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could you give me your contact later?
Yeah, that would be, yeah, we can definitely do that.
Yeah, just following up on that and on the whole issue of advocacy, I don't know how much you have worked with the University of Iowa Center for Human Rights in terms of, you know, collaboration. Okay, that would have been my suggestion, that the issues you're talking about are human rights issues, like you rightly pointed out. So working with organizations like that for me, and then secondly, there's you've actually identified the fact that this is not just. I think it's not just about the University of Iowa. There's a state issue, there's a national issue of concern. There is a legislative forum on immigration on Friday at Kirkwood, the center here. I think this would be a very good opportunity for you to go to that legislative forum, because there are going to be state legislators there who are going to answer questions about immigration. So my take is my initial question is whether you had already you said no, you had already you're contacting the Center for Human Rights and discussing some of these issues, because I think it's very important to develop that base for advocacy and also people who are going to speak at forum, one of which is this one, and so that is my take on that. The other aspect of my question has to do with the fact that the SWANA region straddles the Gulf, some of the countries in what used to be called the Middle East, and African countries. There are also other organizations probably that belong to, like the African Students Association. When I was a student and I was a president of the African Students Association, we had Sudanese and Egyptians who were part of that group too. And I think collaborating with groups like that, I don't know if there are collaborations. My emphasis is whether we're actually in trying to find allies, whether we're actually collaborating with groups that would give us strength in terms of numbers.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have been reaching out to orgs, but Asel and I, as we both are trying to pursue our degrees, as much as we'd love to put and invest 100% of our energy into advocacy, we don't have that privilege right now. And so it's great to hear, and we're happy to give out emails, to take contacts, to reach out to folks. But when two undergraduate students cold call people, it's really easy to push us aside, And so, yes, we definitely are interested in attacking this through getting numbers together and trying to show that, strength in numbers kind of mentality. I know I have been asked by Student Legal Services here to see if the ACLU would be interested in this. So we are planning, or I'm personally planning, I don't want to speak for Asel, to continue this, especially as I head into my grad program focusing on this region. And so, yeah, any sort of those contacts we'd be happy to take after the presentation, or we can give out our email and folks can email us too with those contacts. That would be great.
And we also have been in contact with the African Student Association. Yeah. When we were looking to get a culture house created, they mentioned that we can share that space with the African Student Association. And then I feel like it just kind of lost.
Right, and I want to speak from Afro House's perspective too, and sorry if I cut you off there. They, as we stated before, there is a severe lack of funding happening to multicultural efforts on campus. And my understanding when I last spoke with Shalisa Gladney, who is director of Afro House, that they do have some structural issues in the building and is a very cramped space. And so they were more than open to welcoming us there, but they are struggling to keep the Black student population here on campus supported, which is what the Afro House its legacy and its current intent is for. And so we didn't feel also as SWANA students that we wanted to impose on them either, knowing that history and that legacy. So yeah, no, we would love, like we said, any contacts. But yes, it's been back and forth, people trying to help us out, but folks are, advocacy folks are tired, folks are drained, and so we, a few people can only do so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yasmina and Asel, for your excellent presentation. This was ICFRC's 5th presentation for the spring semester. Our next program next week, Wednesday at 12 noon, features speaker Dr. Golnaz Sharafutinova, a professor at King's College London. She will speak on From Victimhood to Aggression, Russia's Path to War Against Ukraine. Thank you for joining us today. We are adjourned.